back to our reading this morning, I've come up with the conclusion that religion is complicated stuff. I'm not sure why that is. It shouldn't be. It should be the easiest and least complicated thing of all. Yet it's not. Religion should be the easiest and least complicated thing of all because religion, for me, is about experiences. It's about our direct experience with one another, the natural world, and that transcending mystery that is beyond all knowing. The word religion comes from the Latin word regulare, meaning to bind together. Religion, therefore, can be said to be the experiences that bind us together. What makes religion so complex and complicated, however, is not the experiences we have. I don't think it's the experiences. What makes religion so complex, complicated, and confusing is the language we use to describe, to explain, to interpret, and to communicate these experiences. Whereas religion is said to be that which binds us together, when I find the language used in religion literally tearing us apart. Tearing us apart. Language can be labeled the culprit, not religion. And let's face it, language is complicated. There was no way around that issue. I remember when I was traveling in New Zealand and visiting with a friend with a young child, she went upstairs to get ready for our outing and she shouted down to me, "Bill, would you put the pram in the boot?" And I just looked around at all the things on the floor remote and I had no idea what she was talking about. She came out and just laughed and said, "Put the stroller in the trunk." I was like, "Oh, now you're speaking English, thank you." And I remember when I was a kid and we were visiting relatives in Boston and my aunt asked us if he wanted a tonic. I think all my brothers and sisters, we just looked at each other like, what is she, nuts? Offering kids tonic? Tonic for us was tonic water. For gin and tonic's my mother's favorite drink. Tonic in Boston is soda, like Pepsi or Coke. A milkshake in Boston is milk with chocolate, vanilla, or strawberry syrup mixed in a shaker. There's no ice cream in a milkshake in Boston. That's called a frap. You order a frap outside of the Boston area, and I'm sure no one will know what in heaven's name you are talking about. These are just tiny examples of perhaps local regionalisms. But add the complications of religious language into the mix: Christian, God, prayer, holy, the Christ. Add religious language along with religion abuse and religious wounds. Add them all into the mix. Man, you created a tangled web that may seem near impossible to unravel. Then we can say religion has bound us together, perhaps tied us together, but it has done through miscommunication, misunderstanding, misinterpretations, pain, anger, and hostility. This language is complicated stuff. And language is important to us Unitarian Universalists. It always had been. And I would imagine it always will be. We choose our words and phraseology very carefully. And religious language is also a challenge for us as Unitarian Universalists. It always has been. But does it have to be? There is that story that's asked, why is it that you use "don't sing together"? Why don't you use "sing together"? Because they are constantly reading ahead to see if they agree with the words. I think our morning reading beautifully describes for us what can happen when religious language prevents us from moving forward or calling forward that thing in our service which we gather around. We know we want the Spirit to be part of our worship service. We just don't know what to call it. What is it? How do we communicate, translate, and facilitate this it, both in our services and in our lives? Describing it is the work of language. Experiencing it is the work of religion. The matrimony of the two is the work of our chosen faith. Calling it forth is the work of changing the world. I don't remember if any of you remember over the years of the Think Forward administration among the UUA, we were asked to examine this topic of religious language. What is being suggested here is for us to develop what UU minister and humanist David Baumberg calls a language of reverence. We have manned the ramparts of reason, writes Baumberg, and we are prepared to defend the citadel of the mind. But in the process, we have lost the ability to speak of that which is sacred, holy, of ultimate importance to us, the language which would allow us to enter into critical dialogue with the religious community. Now, this call, as I hear it from Baumberg, is for us to be able to freely find the language necessary to describe the religious movement that we experience. In a word or two, it's about naming it. And yet I would challenge us to take two steps further and say, first, that it's not about naming it, but also being comfortable, tolerant, and accepting about other people's language and what they use to describe it. And secondly, that no matter what the language is to describe it, call it forth. Call it forth. Allow it to be part of your Sunday services and beyond. In seminary, I was part of a silent prayer group that met weekly on Wednesdays in the chapel. There for 1 hour, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Unitarians, Muslims, and more sat in complete silence together for an hour of prayer. The sponsoring faculty member, the Professor Sarah Coakley, a renowned scholar and now a Episcopal priest, began and ended our time of silent prayer by ringing a meditation bowl at the end of every hour. As that bell rang, we remained seated together in silence, as that incredible sense of peace, power, and extreme holiness just hovered around us. Eventually, Professor Coakley would stand and we would begin the passing of the peace, whether either by shaking hands or for others a good hug, and we would say, "Peace be with you." I remember one day as this silent prayer group met over lunch, and not prayer, and we were talking about the benefits from our time together. I mentioned to Professor Kolke that in that time, the time that was most important to me was at the end of the hour, right after the bell rang, and right before she stood to pass the peace. There was a moment of amazing peace when we all just sat there together. "Oh, I love that moment," I said. "I often don't want it to end. I don't know what to call it, but I love it." Professor Coakley chimed in, "I call it the Christ," she said. The Christ. And all of a sudden, my heart moved and my mind shifted, and that word, the Christ, took on a whole new meaning. It took on a whole new meaning because I had experienced it myself. Now, this was not the language I would use to describe it, but it didn't matter. It was not about the language we used. It was about the experience we had. And truth be told, I was elated at that language because finally, I had the experience of the Christ that was holy, healing, and heartfelt. Now, upon hearing that word, I can translate that in my own mind to mean this amazing sense of peace. Now, the use of this particular religious language has new meaning to me, new meaning that I can translate for myself. And it's not constricting or confining, it's liberating, totally liberating. As religious liberals, we are often faced with the task of translating much of our language, our religious communities, into a lexical framework we can claim for ourselves. I view this idea of translation in the context of my work within the deaf community. A deaf person is constantly translating. Even in the face of a professional interpreting, the deaf client is always translating their mind and its contents of a sign. It's how they function in this world. They are part of a cultural and linguistic minority. Unless the interpreter happens to be a native speaker of ASL, which is very rare, the interpreter's sign choice or phraseology will always have to be translated in the hearing speaker. Is always in the context of stimulus simultaneously interpreting, if the hearing speaker is talking about repairing, rebuilding, or reconstructing a relationship, one sign is used. Over the idea of repairing, rebuilding, or reconstructing a building, fixing. In any case, the deaf person is always doing that translation in their mind, translating the appropriate phraseology to fit the linguistic and cultural background. I see Unitarian Universalists as having to do a similar translation process. As UU hears the word God, we can translate into meaning to suit our meaning and phraseology. Now, some linguistics say you can't just change language and meaning in that way. And I want to say, sure you can. Language is always changing, always developing, always evolving. 25 years ago, did we have the words internet or email, cyberspace, or the term spam? 25 years ago, spam was some strange square meat out of a can. Today, the word spams means something totally different. We have court cases debating spam. Oh, language is always changing. So does this translation process take work? Oh, yes, it most certainly does. It will take the work of bringing our whole self, mind, body, and spirit to our religious life. Yet our faith of Unitarian Universalism does require us to bring our minds to our religious life, to use our minds not only for the ramparts of reason, but for the development of a religious language we can all share. Language that will allow us to bring the Spirit forth when we want it, and religious language that will allow us to enter into the critical dialogue with any religious community. And part of us developing this language is being able to teach it to our children and our youth. One of the most disheartening things I've ever heard was when I was serving a church in Lexington, and one of our youth, after graduating from there, said to me, "I'm still not sure what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist." And I think this youth did know. She had experienced something here that was life-changing. She told me that too. What I think she may not have heard was a language to articulate her experience of her faith. When we have the faith to articulate and communicate our faith with the correct language, we are then ready to take on the world. Religion isn't complicated stuff. It's the simple stuff of the human heart. Language isn't that complicated and complex either. It's the simple stuff of the human mind. And this faith of Unitarian Universalism is the perfect union of heart and mind. My friends, when we go forth from here with our hearts open to experience all that this religion offers to us, may we go forth from here with our minds open to naming and labeling these experiences in a language that is liberating and freeing, and may go forth from here, ready, willing, and able to call it forth to be with us now and forevermore. Blessed be, and amen.